In this video, we'll focus on the PPC curve, which is short for the production possibilities curve, and in some textbooks also called the PPF curve, which is short for production possibilities frontier curve. The PPC curve is represented by this curved line here that represents the PPC curve. And what the PPC curve indicates is the combination of two types of products that can be produced by using all your resources efficiently. Okay, so what I want you to understand here, or what I want you to do, is to put yourself again into the shoes of a supplier or a producer of products. And this is your PPC curve. So for example, we have two products that we're producing. So as a supplier, we're producing two products. One is represented on the y-axis, and the other good is represented on the x-axis. Okay, so let's say, for example, you're a manufacturer and you produce cloth as your good one. And let's say, for example, you produce shoes as your good two. So cloth and shoes. Now, let's say, for example, that with our current resources, or with your current resources, we use all of those resources to produce one of the goods. So let's say, for example, we use all our resources to produce cloth and no shoes. That means that we will rely on this point here. So point A, which represents that we're using all our production facilities or all our resources to just produce cloth. So let's say, for example, we produce 10 units. And then let's move all the way to the x-axis. So to this point here. This point will represent that we are only producing, or we're using all our resources to only produce the capital good, which is shoes. So point A represents all cloth, no shoes, and point B represents all shoes and no cloth. But surely we can produce a combination of both products. So let's say, for example, we have a product or a point which is point C, and here it represents maybe half shoes and half cloth. So let's say, for example, this point B was also 10. Now we have a situation whereby we can produce 5 units of cloth and let's say 5 units of capital goods, just to make it easier to understand. So let's assume we're only producing cloth. So we would therefore be on point A. Now, let's say, for example, if we want to produce more shoes. In order to produce more shoes, we have to give up some production of cloth. And this is what the PPC curve stands for. It basically means that you can only produce more of one product by giving up the production of another product. So in this case, if we are moving from point A to point C, we give up cloth production in order to gain more shoes. So how it looks on the graph is we're moving from 10 units of cloth, so giving up 5 units of cloth in order to gain a further 5 products in shoes. So for example, we're producing more shoes. But what happens if we were at point B? So now we're using all our resources to produce shoes, but now we want to give up some of that shoe production in order to gain more cloth production, because maybe people are demanding more cloth in a certain area or in the world, and you want to try and meet that demand. So let's say, for example, we're moving now from point B to point C. So what needs to happen here? Here we need to give up shoe production, a bit of it, in order to gain more cloth. So on the graph, we're moving from point B, so from 10 units to 5 units of shoe production in order to gain more cloth production. So we're moving from 0 all the way to 5. And that's how we can move from point B to point C. Likewise, we can also move from point A to point C. So movement from point A to C and a movement from point B to C, whichever way you look at it, represents a situation of Pareto efficiency. So what this means, and what the PPC curve is trying to tell us, is that you can only produce more of one product by giving up the production of another product. So A to C represents a situation of Pareto efficiency, and if we're moving from B to C, it also represents a situation of Pareto efficiency. Okay, so the next thing we need to understand about the PPC curve is which of these points are efficient. Now, we're already familiar with A, B, and C, which is on the PPC curve, right? And to understand this is anything that's on the PPC curve is efficient. So on the right-hand side, it asks the question, is production efficient at these points? So if we look at points A, B, and C, we can say, yes, they are efficient. Anywhere on the line is efficient. What about points D? Point D represents a situation whereby it's unattainable, meaning that production at this point is totally unattainable in the sense that we do not have enough resources to produce this type of product or these types of products. So we can say, is it efficient? It could be efficient, but we cannot achieve that. So we can say not applicable in this situation. Point E, as you can see, is below the line. This represents a point of inefficiency. So we can say, is production efficient at points E? We can say, no, it's not efficient. And the reason for that is because we're not making full utilization of our resources. So therefore, we may be wasting our opportunity to produce more products, and we are wasting the opportunity to actually produce those products efficiently. So therefore, point E represents inefficiency, and it's a situation that we never want to be in. Another way you can also understand point E in macroeconomics, considering a PPC curve for a country, this point E is normally also classified as a point of unemployment, which means that a country has the capacity to produce more products, but because of the amount of unemployment, we're not as productive as we should actually be. Okay, so now that you understand the points of inefficiency and efficiency, we can move on to three types of movements in the PPC curve. I'm going to show you the way that the PPC curve moves to the right or to the left-hand side based on production facilities or the amount of resources available. You might also be wondering what I mean by consumer goods and capital goods. A simple way to understand this is consumer goods needs more laborers, so more people. So how we can say this is we need more labor to produce these types of goods. And for capital goods, we need more machinery. So it becomes a bit more technical. So when you see this in the textbook and you see capital goods always require a lot more machinery to produce that type of product. And if you look at consumer goods or products that don't require a lot of machinery, it would require a lot more labor to produce that particular type of good. Okay, so case one. Let's say, for example, we are happily producing at point C on this PPC curve. So PPC curve we will call AB, or let's rather say AA. So that's our production possibilities curve, so our PPC curve. But now let's say, for example, there's an improved technique or new machinery that's come out in order to produce more shoes. So we import this machinery from, for example, Japan, Germany, or China. And what happens to our PPC curve now, it will actually swivel outwards. So we're still producing the same amount of cloth, but because now we've got new machinery to produce more shoes, our PPC curve tends to move outwards. So now we're moving from point A to point B. And if we were to understand this with using numerics, we can say, let's say, for example, we're producing 5 units of each product, but now we've got a new machinery to produce more shoes. So what happens now is that we can actually produce more shoes and keep the same production for cloth. So now we move up to 8 units of capital goods or shoe production because we received or we bought new technology to make shoes faster or to make shoe production more efficient. Now let's say the second case is that there's an improved technique for producing cloth. So there's a new technology or new machinery out there and it allows us to produce more consumer goods. Therefore, if we are on point AA, or sorry, line AA, now what happens is we can produce more cloth. So therefore, our PPC curve will now look something like this. Again, using numerics, let's try and understand this. So let's say we're producing 5 units of each product, and now we get new technology for producing cloth. So what happens is now we on a higher PPC curve, meaning we can actually produce a lot more cloth. Let's say there's an increase in cloth production from 5 units to 10 units. And both representations on the line basically represent efficiency. So A just moving upwards to B because we've got an improved technique for producing consumer goods. And this now will allow us to move from point AA on our PPC curve to a new PPC curve, which is now called AB, representing our latest movement from point A to point B. And the third case that we have is, let's say, for example, we now have an improved technique for both products. So productivity increases for both types of products. Therefore, we are on our original PPC curve of AA. But now because we received or we found new ways or better ways to produce cloth and shoes, we now move to a higher PPC curve. So what happens is it shifts upwards and outwards to a new PPC curve, which is B represented by PB. And numerically, what we can always say here, or we can look at this example and say we're producing 5 units of each, but now because we received new technology or we found new ways to produce this type of product, we can produce at a higher level. So let's say, for example, we're producing now, just make this a little bit clearer, we're now producing 7 units of cloth and 7 units of capital goods. So we moved from point A to point B. So let's say that's A to point B. From our old PPC curve of AA, we now move to our new PPC curve of BB. So we moved outwards there on both sides. With regard to the three cases that we've just gone over now, we can also do it in the opposite direction. So let's say, for example, we've got product X, or sorry, product Y and product X, and let's say our PPC curve looks like that. Let's say, for example, there's a decline in productivity, so there's a recession in the country, or we get rid of workers because they're not efficient. We can move from point A, so our PPC curve of AA, we can move down to the left on to B. So a new PPC curve representing BB. Now what happens is if we had to just draw our lines there to say that we're producing 5 units of A or Y and 5 units of X, we can now say that we move to a lower PPC curve, which now we're producing 3 units of each product. So you can practice the opposites of these going backwards or working backwards, and you can see that the situation on the PPC curve will be the exact opposite of what the increase is. Okay, so we can summarize now. Anything on the line, which is represented by AA, or let's say point C, D, B, or any point alike, we can say that these 3 points are efficient. Any point above the line, so let's say point F, represents a point that is unattainable. And any point within the line represents a point of inefficiency. The second case is that when we find new ways to produce a particular product, let's say, for example, shoes, then our graph or curve swivels outwards from, let's say, the original curve of AA all the way to AB, showing an improvement or increase in technology for shoes. Now, let's say, for example, we had a decrease in production technique for shoes. So all that will happen is that we'll move to a lower PPC curve. The same thing happens with cloth. So for example, if I had to draw it on the right-hand side, we say that our PPC curve for product C for cloth and for shoes. Let's say, for example, we receive new technology to produce cloth. All that will happen is we'll move our PPC curve upwards from our original position of AA to now AB. But what happens when there's a decline in technology for that sector? So starting off at our point AA as our original point, we now move to a lower PPC curve from A to C. A to C, showing a decline in technology or decline in productivity in the cloth sector. And the last case where we find improvement in technology or productivity for those two products, for cloth and for shoes, we can move outwards. So again, original PPC curve AA moving out to BB, representing a situation of improved technology or improved production technique. But what happens if we move to the left-hand side? So let's say we move from point A to CC. That means this represents a decline in technology or decline in production, also maybe coming or stemming from a point of unemployment. So there's a recession in the country due to a virus outbreak. What happens? We're moving from point AA to point CC because now we're producing less products.